Hello everyone, my name's Gavin and a very warm welcome to you all. Both those of you from the congregations that I serve as minister and those who regularly join us from elsewhere for our online worship. And those of you who just happen to have clicked on this video wondering what it's all about. It's great to have you all with us today. I have something a little different for you this week. A message and a song. While I was away on sabbatical in the summer, I managed to complete the recording and mixing of a few of my songs. So today I'm sharing with you an introduction to one of those songs, and then you'll be the first people outside my family to hear it. My wife has various nicknames for me, some of them less flattering than others. But one nickname that I'm prepared to own up to is Map Man, which sounds like the title of the most geeky and boring superhero ever. But anyway, I love maps. And sometimes at night, when my wife is reading a book, I'll be looking at a map, planning my next walk. Well, here's a few symbols that you would find on an Ordnance Survey map, and I wonder if you know what they signify. These are the symbols for different kinds of boundaries: national, district, county, or national park boundaries. Now, one of the historic reasons why maps were developed was so that boundaries could be defined and published, so that these lines could show what belonged to who, and where the dividing line was between them and us. And for some of those boundaries, on the ground, there will be boundary markers, perhaps a bollard or a sign on a road, or a fence, or a wall. And at some of those boundaries, there are security guards making sure that only certain people can cross. But boundary markers exist in other aspects of our lives too. A boundary marker is often something visual and relatively superficial that allows people to identify who is inside and who is outside a particular group. For example, in our own culture, if you were to see someone dressed in a black shirt, black jeans, black shoes, black jewellery, dyed black hair, even black lipstick, you would assume that they were trying to identify themselves as a goth. Fashion is one thing that can act as a boundary marker, especially for people in their teenage years as they go through a time of insecurity, of trying to assert their identity and work out where they belong. But there are other things that become boundary markers for some that are far more destructive. James Dunn was for many years a professor of theology at Durham University and internationally renowned for his work on what is known as the New Perspective on Paul. And he wrote quite a bit about this tendency towards boundary markers for the Jews in the 1st century AD. Not in fashion, but in 3 other things. He points out that there are vast amounts of rabbinic writing on 3 subjects: circumcision, dietary laws, and Sabbath keeping. Now, no devout rabbi would have claimed that these things were at the heart of the law. But Dunn suggests that these were the focus because they were the boundary markers, the visible things that helped to identify who was inside and who was outside the family of God. If you didn't follow the ritual washing customs, you were out. If you handled things that were unclean, you were out. If you worked on the Sabbath, you were out. If you ate the wrong foods, you were out. And this explains why so often it's these issues that the Pharisees and the scribes criticize Jesus and his disciples about, and why they get so upset that Jesus spends so much of his time befriending those who they consider to be on the wrong side of their boundary lines. This man welcomes sinners and eats with them. That's the complaint that they make before Jesus tells them his parables about God's compassion for and God's seeking of those who the Pharisees regard as being on the wrong side of their boundary markers. And when the Apostle Paul is writing his letters to the earliest churches, concerned about the divisions between Christians from a Jewish background and those from a Gentile background, the New Perspective on Paul theologians say that when Paul talks about the works of the law, he's primarily talking about these boundary marker issues: Sabbath, circumcision, and food laws, and wanting them to see that they are not the heart of their faith. They are not the things that bring us into relationship with God. So they don't need to insist that the Gentile Christians follow them all. And Jesus has broken down these boundaries, and the grace of God revealed in Jesus transforms their perspective on them so much that Paul can say, there is neither Jew nor Gentile, neither slave nor free, neither male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. Sadly, throughout history, the Christian church has continued to find other boundary markers and has excluded people or made them feel excluded because they were on the wrong side of some line that we had drawn, claiming that God was on our side of that line. We do not reflect the grace of God in Christ when we become focused on those boundary markers. Perhaps you can remember drawing Venn diagrams when you were at school. These diagrams show a set of people or things that share a common characteristic. And they're an example of bounded sets. Sets that are defined by their boundary. Something or someone is either on one side of the boundary line or the other. Some sets might intersect with other sets, but there is always a dividing line. And perhaps at its worst, the church has operated like a bounded set. We have defined a set of beliefs that you must sign up to, a set of behaviours people are expected to follow. And if you're on the right side of the boundary line, then you can belong. About 40 years ago, an American theologian called Paul Hibert suggested that perhaps we should see Christianity not as a bounded set, but as a centered set. A centered set is defined not by a boundary, but by its center. And it's based not on location, but on direction. It's not about being one side of the line or the other. It's about moving towards the center. And so, is the church called to be more like a centered set, with Jesus at the center, and with no boundaries needed, just a desire to keep moving closer and closer to the centre, and to encourage others on that journey to grow in grace and in the knowledge and love of Christ, and to seek to become more Christ-like in the way that we live. I'd like to share with you a song that I finished recording and mixing while on sabbatical in the summer, but one that I've worked on at various times over the past few years. It's partly a reflection on stories that I've heard of people who've been hurt because of the tendency in society and churches to keep on creating those boundary lines. And it's also a celebration of the all-embracing love of God in Jesus. And it's called No Dividing Line.
Ever since she was a girl in school, the message was you don't belong. And always with that same old line, go back to where you came from. It's a story that's as old as time, the bitter ways that we divide. We draw another stupid line and say that God is on our side. Again and again, the cause of so much misery, when the ones who should know better are on the wrong side of history. While headlines trade in hate and fear, they're building up those walls with populists and presidents. But one day they shall fall. There are no borders in the Maker's grand design, no strangers to the heart of love divine. No one excluded in the rainbow of God's grace, and there is no dividing line. He heard it back in Sunday school, that what he felt was all a sin. A nagging voice within him said, God couldn't love a boy like him. The shame and fear were taking hold. His tender heart was losing hope. His family didn't even know until they read his goodbye notes. Again and again, the cause of so much misery, when the ones who should know better are on the wrong side of history. And preachers waving Bibles stoke the fires of bigotry, twisting words to see the other as the enemy. There are no borders in the Maker's grand design, no strangers to the heart of love divine. No one excluded in the rainbow of God's grace. There is no dividing line. There is no dividing line, no good reason to define who is us and who is them. No more questioning and doubts of who is in and who is out. Why can't we let those walls